Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi Ari Sachs of Congregation Beth Mordechai coming to you with today's edition of this week's online Parashah class. We're just going to take one quick moment and then we'll get started. Okay, well, I want to welcome you again to this week's class where we discuss the first Torah portion of the book of Deuteronomy, known as Devarim. So, for this week, not only is the entire book called Devarim, but our Torah portion is also Devarim, as is with all other first books of the different books of the Torah, that the first Torah portion reflects the name of the actual portion. And what Deuteronomy is famous for is that it is Moses' recounting of the journey of the Israelites up until that point. So you have many things that are similar. Many of the same stories appear. For instance, the giving of the Ten Commandments appears one more time. And so the rabbis like to play around with sort of the repetition of the stories and of also the teachings that we get in Deuteronomy. How is this maybe a little bit different than that? And there's a lot to learn when you have similar stories or the same story just written in different ways. And one of them that appears in this week's Torah portion is actually the moment in which Moses says, or Moses indicates, that it is too much of a burden for him to be able to lead the people on his own, and he needs help. And there's actually two other moments other than our Torah portion today that describe a similar case in which Moses basically says, in one capacity or the other, that he needs help. The first one is a very famous selection from the from the Torah portion of Yitro, in which Moses' father-in-law Jethro suggests that it's too much of a burden for him to carry on his own. And the second one, which is perhaps not necessarily as famous, except for the end part, which we'll get to a little bit later, is from the book of Numbers in Parashat Ba'alotcha, when Moses is speaking to God directly, and that is another moment in which Moses basically says, I need help. But what I'd like to do for today is I actually want to look at the three different portions having to do with Moses's moment in which either he is expressing or someone is telling him that this is too much for you. And then what is common to all three is that there is this moment in which the authority of Moses's rule is being delegated to others. And I think that the issue of delegation is an extremely important one for us to consider. That most of us, if not all of us, have some time, one or the other, whether that's at work, whether that's at home, whether that's in our personal lives, that we command we have a certain amount of authority to be able to do something. And there are times that I think most of us, if not all of us, feel that that authority becomes much of a burden. And how we deal with that, whether we continue to take that upon ourselves, to hold that responsibility, the weight upon our shoulders, or, as is very important practice, is to be able to say, I can't carry this burden by myself. I can't hold all this responsibility, so I'm going to delegate that responsibility to other people. And that's the importance of delegating, that when we have a lot of power, we have a lot of responsibility upon our shoulders, that it makes work a little bit easier. That, as the phrase goes, that many hands make work light. And as we talk about being able to share the burden, I want to welcome Avi Duvdevani to our class today. Hi, Avi.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
So, Avi, as I was just mentioning, that what we're talking about today is delegation and how important it is to delegate. And the other aspect of it, though, is, if you are in a position of authority, position of leadership, and you know that it's important to delegate, but once you actually hand it off to someone, that there are many different challenges involved in that. How are people going to look at me? Do they think I'm giving up on my responsibility by letting others take control? Am I still going to be able to control what others do if I give them responsibility? How do I know that my wishes are going to be fulfilled? So there are many different challenges involved in delegating, even if it is agreed upon that delegation is something very important. So I guess the first question I want to throw out to Avi is just any thoughts you have on delegating, both of its importance, the challenges associated with it, and just anything that you have to share on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the delegating is very important. In my own career, I've come to recognize that without delegations, you can't really achieve success. So it's just the way the delegation is done should be not in a haphazard way, but in a kind of controlled process. We can set expectations and review results and create kind of a team, even if it's delegating one-on-one, create kind of a team environment and be supportive of the outcome that you expect from that delegation.
So in a sense, it's almost as if even if you delegate responsibility to someone else, that you're still a part of the conversation. In fact, everyone's a part of the conversation.
Yes, it has to be synergistic, I think.
Right, so kind of working one off of the other. Want to welcome a newbie into our class today, Diane Augustine, all the way from, where in the Midwest are you from again?
Altus, Oklahoma.
So welcome from Altus, say it again?
Altus.
Altus. Altus,
yes.
Oklahoma. So
yes.
Want to show the power of this kind of learning, that we can gather together people from all across the United States. We have Washington, D.C. We have, today we have South Amboy, but now we also have in Perth Amboy with myself, and then we also now have in Oklahoma. So welcome, Diane, and hopefully you can join many more times. So the first thing is, just to catch Diane up, that what we're talking about is the issue of delegation, and of both the importance of it to kind of get things done, and also the challenges associated with it, with sort of giving authority to someone else or to other people to do things that you may feel like you still need to have a say in or sort of control over. And Avi just made the point that it's very important if you want to get things done to delegate. You see that in pretty much any career, but that it's not just you're handing something off and that you're not part of the conversation, rather that it's trying to create a team atmosphere so that sort of everyone is working off of each other. I want to know if you just have any quick thoughts on that before we get to our learning for today.
Well, I guess my main thought would be some of my friends are sort of fence setters, as far as, they really support Israel, but they don't want to offend their friends that don't support Israel. And, sometimes it feels sort of like you're delegating that responsibility that they should have, being that they really do support and believe in Israel. It's hard for me not to say to them, you're not doing your job. You can't be a fence sitter. But I did quote something from Elie Wiesel earlier, and he said something basically along the lines of, you cannot not take sides, because to remain silent, basically, you're aiding and abetting the enemy. You're only helping the terrorists. I mean, that's not his exact quote, and I posted that on. We have a group page on Facebook, and I posted that in there because the person who started that page is supposedly pro-Israel, but actually he teaches at the college, and he actually made the comment that he didn't want to offend those who really aren't supporters, and I just think that's terribly wrong.
So what I'm hearing from what you're saying, and I think this could potentially become one of the challenges of delegating, and maybe sort of what Avi was referring to in terms of trying to create a team atmosphere. I mean, on one hand, you're talking about something that's a political issue, that how you act towards a particular occurrence, particular challenge or opportunity that's in the world right now and how you want to deal with it, that your own voice, you're not necessarily working in a team atmosphere towards a common goal, but that should you have a voice on a particular issue of interest or of importance, that should be for you. Meaning that to what extent does someone have a responsibility to speak up? And that the term delegation in that regard, not necessarily in regard of working, but in that regard is almost to say, I don't want to take that responsibility by myself, so you take it over here. And I think that seems to be part of the challenge of delegation, which is both in terms of perception, that if I don't take responsibility upon myself, if I want to delegate it to someone else, then you have this case where it looks like, I don't really care, or I'm not saying this is my problem. So if delegation from a perspective of work or a perspective of getting things done is an important value, how do we make sure that it doesn't contain that sense of delegation in this other context, which is used in a way to say, this is not my problem, I don't want to deal with it, I'm going to let other people deal with it so I don't have to on myself. So just to kind of keep that thought in mind, both in terms of both the importance of delegation, but of also the real challenges involved. And with that, we're going to get to our learning. So as I mentioned at the beginning, there are 3 different parts of the Torah. One is our Torah portion, in which Moses says the burden is too much for me, and then there is an opportunity to delegate some of his authority or some of the responsibility to others. And so the first one we're going to take a look at, not our Torah portion, but the most famous example is from the book of Exodus. Sorry, one second. It is from the book of Exodus, and let's do the wrong one. Sorry, hold on one second. I'll bring this back. Okay. It's from the book of Exodus, chapter 18. Do you see that on your screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is from the story of Moses' father-in-law Jethro speaking to Moses about the challenge of leadership at his time as leading the Israelites into the desert. So I'm not going to, because there's a lot of text for us to look at, I'm not going to read this in Hebrew. I'm going to go over the English but kind of summarize it as we go along. So feel free just to follow along from verse 17. Moses, his father-in-law, said, "The thing that you're doing is not good. You're surely going to wear away, both you and the people, for this thing," I think it's of leadership, and of making all these decisions, "is too heavy for you. You're not able to do it alone." So listen to what I'm saying. I'm trying to give you the best kind of counsel, that you should be before the people, you should be there for the people who for God, meaning that you're sort of God's representative before the people, and you should bring cases to cases to God. "And you shall teach everyone the statutes and the laws, and you shall show them the way in which they have to go and the way in which they must move forward." And then, in addition to teaching everyone what they should know, moreover, from verse 21, "Thou shalt provide out of all the people able men, such as fear of God, men of truth, hating unjust gain, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50s, and rulers of 10. So basically so Jethro is saying, not only do you teach everyone the laws, but you're now going to set people who are going to judge them. "And let them judge the people at all seasons." And then this is key. "And it shall be that every great matter, hadavar hagadol, they shall bring unto you, Moses, but every small matter, v'chol hadavar hakaton, they shall judge themselves. So they shall make it easier for you and be less of a burden." And that if this works, then everything is going to be much better. And so Moses does that, and then says at the end, "And they judge the people at all seasons, the hard causes they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. So what I wanted to kind of unpack from here are four different kinds of matters to concern ourselves with in regards to delegation that appears in all of these instances that we're going to look at. So the first is, what is the reason to delegate? Meaning that we have that if you are in a position of leadership, that there has to be a reason why you're delegating it, even if that reason is that I don't want to take this responsibility upon myself, or if it's that we're all going to get the job done if we actually work together. So that there has to be a reason to delegate. Who is the one that particularly benefits from the plan? And from this particularly, I'm looking at who the leader is who is the leader that benefits from it, although we can talk a little bit about who else benefits from the plan. Then, very important for our case, is who's the one who creates the plan? Is this the person who benefits from it? Is this another person? Like, I'm thinking about if you're working at a company and then you wonder, how can we get a job done better, and you get a consultant to say, this is how you should divide up your workload in order to get things done better. So it's coming from an outside source, or is it coming from an inside source? Then finally, what is the actual plan that you must institute? And finally, what is the result of the plan? So using these kind of 5 different points or questions in regards to the issues of delegation, can either of you tell me, or just pick one of them, or you can try to answer all of them, from the portion that we just read about Jethro, to answer to any of these questions? The reason to delegate, who benefits, who creates the plan, and so on and so forth. So do any of you have a suggestion as to what the answers would be?
Well, it was clear that the reason to delegate was that Moses clearly was overextending himself, at least according to his father-in-law, and he was taking on more than he could do by himself. Right. So
right.
that was the reason.
So also that seems to be clear that he's the one who benefits from it. That it makes work light for him. In addition, he also makes a point that it's also going to benefit the people, because they're going to have someone who is going to be working better. What about in terms of who's the one who creates the plan? Meaning, is it Moses who creates his own plan, or is it Jethro who's making the plan?
Well, Jethro kind of laid out the approach, so I suppose Jethro presented, in the industry you call it best practice, right? So he presented an approach that's viewed as a viable approach, right? Right.
So it's definitely not Moses saying, here's what I think that I need to do. It seems to be that's Jethro saying what I need to do. And then in terms of what is the plan, what is the result, I just brought this chart here to kind of look at it. And this is how I saw it. Tell me if you think I missed anything. The plan is to seek capable men who fear God, who are trustworthy, and who also spurn bribes. And that we should that Moses should set them as chiefs. Now this is important, by the way, because it does not say, as we're going to learn a little bit later on, but it does not say that Moses should choose the leaders who are already leading the people. Meaning it's about the kind of qualities that these people are, not that they're already tribal leaders, that should determine whether or not they become chiefs. And then the other point of whether the plan is that they resolve minor, and then Moses resolves major. So that what I'm imagining is kind of like a situation whereby you have all of the small matters are down here, that you have all the people, all these judges answering, and then anything that comes up, you go to a higher level, almost as if built like our court system. So the Supreme Court, theoretically, only deals with issues that cannot be dealt with on a lower level, so that Moses will have less work to do because of the fact that he's not dealing with all the minor stuff that takes time. He's going to be able to have the headspace to deal with all the things that are major. Now, what's interesting about this is that, speaking to Avi's point before about working in a team atmosphere of delegating in that manner, so that one person may have responsibility but you're all involved, this approach does not seem to fit that way, right? This approach is saying, you deal with your stuff, I'm going to deal with this other stuff, and kind of creating a dichotomy between the two. And that's
well, let me just say that's, I mean, the team approach doesn't mean that everybody has the equal responsibility. In a team approach, everyone has a span of authority and control as delegated by the delegator.
That's true. I agree that that team approach means that you have a particular role to play. But I think that when it comes to the difference between, say, a team approach and a hierarchical one, is that a team approach means that even if I'm at the top and even if I'm not dealing with something on a day-to-day matter, I'm still involved in the process. I'm still involved in some capacity in how those others are making the decisions on the ground. Right? We don't see Moses saying, I'm going to check in with you and see how you're doing, and I'll give you suggestions as to how best for you to rule. Rather saying, you deal with that. And in fact, if you take a look at the very last verse, or I point this out here in the chart, it says the result of all of this is that difficult matters the people would bring to the judges would bring to Moses, and all the minor matters they would decide themselves, so that they are distinct from either Moses, you could say even from God, which we're going to get to in a moment. Any other thoughts on that? Any reactions? Avi, does that answer your point that you were trying to say before? Or
well, I'm still not convinced that Moses in this model would be wholly and completely divorced from the fact that his delegates have this span of authority that he granted to them. Just by having him done that, he's somehow involved. And the fact that he might expect to hear from someone who wants to escalate it has to have him engage in some way, even if it's a very peripheral, minor way. He can't be completely disengaged and still be able to, I think, determine stuff that's pushed up to him if he's not somehow engaged in stuff that's going on below him.
So partially what I'm hearing what you're saying is that if there's a difference between something that's minor and something that's major, Moses is still going to have to be a part of that conversation so that he can make sure that knows, this is minor, this is you're going to deal with, this is major, this is something that should be brought up. So that if Moses is going to deal with the major things, he can't be fully disengaged from the process.
Yeah.
Because certain things kind of lead eventually to that major level, but it starts at the minor level, right? You don't start at the Supreme Court. You have to go through the lower levels before you finally get there. And obviously the ones at the higher level are paying attention to what's happening on the lower levels.
Yeah.
Okay. Diane, any thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking this has to be a source of relief from stress of having too heavy of a workload for him. I mean, certainly that would seem to be in line with what Hashem would want for us. It seems to just make sense.
Okay. So it's a way to kind of share everything together. Now I want to take a look at the second text, which deals with delegation of authority. This one comes from the book of Numbers, from Parashat Baha'alotcha. Moses complains here to God, when should I have flesh to give unto all this people? Meaning, they're asking for meat. They're asking for where's the beef? And he's saying, I can't. I don't have so much. I'm not able to bear all this people myself alone. Lo uchal anochi levadi laset et kol ha'am hazeh. This idea of lo levadi, not by myself, also appears in the verse from Exodus, But what's a little bit different here is it's saying laset et ha'am hazeh. It's almost like to bear the people. So the people are necessarily the burden, not the workload, but it's now the people are the actual burden as opposed to the work that I have to do. And if thou deal thus with me, kill me, I pray thee. Meaning, if you're not going to do anything, God, to help me out with this, then just get rid of me, because I can't do anything else. I can't handle this anymore. And so what is God's answer? Gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and officers over them, and bring them unto the tent of meeting, that they may stand there with you. And I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take of the Spirit which is upon thee, and I will put it upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, that thou bear it not yourself alone. And say unto them, sanctify yourselves again tomorrow, and ye shall eat flesh, for you have wept in the ears of the Lord, would that we were given flesh to eat, for it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you flesh, and ye shall eat. So, not disregarding that last verse, but verse 17 especially, of what God is telling to Moses to do in regards to getting help for him. He's saying, I'm going to go back to the chart for a second. We have here, people are demanding meat, and Moses cannot carry them by God's self. Moses seems to be the one who would benefit from this, because it would be God, because he can't be the leader anymore unless he gets some help. So you could also say the people, although they're not as direct as with what Jethro was saying before, that they're also going to benefit from this. And the plan seems to be created from God, meaning this is what God is telling Moses to do. And one of the main differences, I think at least, is that God is saying to gather the 70 elders, meaning that these are elders of the people already. It's not that they have certain qualities that Jethro has, that Jethro is saying they should have, but rather they already had this position of authority. And that what Moses should do is to bring them to the tent of meeting. And I think very significantly it says to draw upon the Spirit that is on Moses and to put it upon them. So just
the other major difference, I think, is that in the first case, Jethro implies that Moses can grant the span of control and authority on his delegates, and in this case, it's God who's granting the span of control and authority on the people that Moses brings to him.
I completely agree. I think that is a major difference. That it almost seems as if it's completely missing from Jethro. Sorry, back up. That God's role is completely missing from what Jethro is saying. That it's simply Moses giving Moses his own authority. Now, there is one mention in Jethro that you should have people who fear God to be a part of it. But at the very end, the last line of that section, it says that they are the ones who are making the judgments. Meaning that it is the individuals themselves, yishputu hem. They're the ones who are making the decisions as to how to rule in minor cases. And I think that it's significant that it's saying that they're the ones who are making the decisions, because especially since God is not really brought up in the case of Jethro, that it seems to be potentially that this act of judgment is strictly within the human realm, meaning humans are going to make mistakes. Humans are going to come up with their own ideas. Yes, Moses maybe gives them the law or tells them this is what you have to do, but human beings are going to be the ones who decide what is right and what is wrong, and God's not a part of this whatsoever. And I wonder, let's assume for a moment that the entire Torah that all the different elements of the Torah happen, so that you have Jethro in one part saying you need to get 70, you need to get leaders upon you, but then we have back in Numbers almost as if that doesn't work. And Moses is saying, I still have this burden upon myself, and God's saying, well, now you need to appoint other leaders. And that the way God does that is to say, don't get men who have all these different qualities who are going to make judgments upon themselves, but rather get people who I'm going to be able to give my Spirit upon them. and now they're speaking out of God and not necessarily just out of their own wishes. Any thoughts on that point?
Yeah, I mean that's very relatable and practical in terms of, you know, what possibly can happen when, you know, you take it upon yourself to delegate authority, and then somehow people fail you, and yet when someone who is wiser and more, you know, worldly helps invest those people, there tends to be better success. So
Hmm.
it seems to make sense for, you know.
I think you're right that, you know,
I
when
mean, you're fallible. If you're a manager or a project leader or whatever the case may be, you're fallible in some way, but there's always someone who's more astute and knowledgeable than you that could be less fallible, I suppose.
right, meaning in what sense are you able to make a decision that you feel is going to reflect upon whether it's the individual um, who has a stronger sense as to what's right, um, or off of principles that you believe to be even more true. You know, for instance, let's move away from the concept of simply saying God was going to rest God's Spirit upon them, in terms of like that there's this Holy Spirit, now they're acting out of this communion with God, but rather that if God's Spirit is almost having correct principles, so that you know the right ways to judge is not just based upon, you know, your own heart, but that you have a sense as to what God would want from you, and you're able to act out of that, and then you're going to become less fallible because you have those set of principles to rely upon. Or you have someone else that you can really rely upon in that manner. So let's, now I want to get to the end of this, because the end is also really interesting in regards to what happens if, let's say, you do delegate authority, and that people are, and that authority kind of comes from giving them a sense of empowerment, that they have the ability to make decisions, whether that ability comes from having a connection with God or from understanding the right principles. I think the end is very fascinating. So we're going to turn back now to our text. And move towards the end. Now, this is after Moses does everything that God suggested, and then the people, the leaders of the camp, the leaders who came to the tent of meeting, that they started to, in Hebrew, vayitz nabe'u, that they started to prophesy, which I think basically means that they had the Spirit upon them and they were able to speak out of that. And now we pick it up. And there ran a young man and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua the son of Nun, the minister of Moses from his youth, answered and said, My Lord Moses, shut them in, or basically shut them up, get them to stop prophesying. Almost, I personally think, to say that Eldad and Medad, who were not, they were not a part of this group who was allowed to speak on behalf of God, they were not allowed to prophesy, that they received the Spirit when they were away, and they started to act as if they were the ones who were in charge. Meaning that once you delegate authority to others, it's not even talking about the 70 elders, it's talking about others who feel that they have an ability because of their own connection with God in this case. And then Moses' answer, I think, is really instructive. Moses says, pick it back up. And Moses said unto him, Are you jealous for my sake? Meaning, are you worried about them prophesying because maybe for me I'm going to lose my power? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them. Umi yiten kol am Adonai nivi'im, ki yiten Adonai et rucho alehem. I think that what that's to say is that Moses is responding by saying, even better. If all people are able to have that great spirit where they have, they believe that they're speaking out of a sense of their connection with God, or that they have the correct principles that God sets before them, that would be so much better. We should have many more people like that. We're going to have everyone more working on the same page. Maybe then we're not going to necessarily need leaders to make decisions or to make judgments, because we're going to already know innately what is needed from us. I almost imagine it's like a sports team that has, the culture of that team is not just do what the head coach or do what the leaders say, but it's that they know for themselves what is necessary and they can police themselves as to what the right behavior is for their team, to instill that their culture is so embedded in who they are that they don't need others to judge upon themselves. And I think in terms of thinking about delegation, the great benefit of delegation is not just that you're able to get things done better, but that what you believe your spirit, or the spirit of the culture of the place in which you work, is going to simply be spread among so many that it just becomes a part of who they are. And the leader's job becomes that much easier.
Yeah, that's the outcome, actually, right? I mean, if relating this to a place of business where you apply this kind of an approach, is that by delegating, you're setting people on kind of the right path, so they can then, become righteous themselves, right?
Right. And isn't it also interesting how Joshua's reaction is to say, you shouldn't have that happen. As a leader, maybe you should control a certain amount of authority. You don't want to let things get too far. And I think that the clash between Joshua and Moses is one that continually exists today. Whether at home or whether
he's cynical. He's cynical because he's a warrior, right? And
right.
he understands leadership in a certain way as a warrior. And so he has this skepticism, right?
As if to say, if you're a soldier, if you're a foot soldier, you should not be
command and control.
Right. Command and control. You should not be questioning or acting independently of your leaders, of your commanders. Diana, any thoughts on this passage, on the conversation?
Not going back to the last passage. I was thinking about where sometimes we discuss an issue and the idea of delegation comes up, and we kind of have plans, but I think the last passage was talking about how we ought to always consult God in things, because He's always got another element that we didn't think of. Like maybe did Moshe hesitate because he didn't know who to appoint? So I'm thinking, maybe he didn't take this to God until a bit later. There was some delay, and then that's when God pointed out, look, you don't have to really delegate and figure out who to appoint. The people already know. They know who their leaders are, and these are the 70, And I think that kind of points out to, maybe we ought to consult Hashem in prayer and things. We have our ideas, but He's always got better plans.
Interesting. So I think what you're really raising here is the sense that maybe the Moses from Jethro, the Moses from the passage where Jethro is sort of telling him this is what you should do. Mm-hmm. Either maybe he didn't necessarily believe it or didn't necessarily understand it fully. How am I going to implement this? Mm-hmm. And he failed to bring God into the conversation. And it wasn't until this passage where God sort of said, I can help. I'm there. Like, rely upon me, So let me be there for you. I think that's a really interesting point. That's a really interesting point. So now that we have these two different ways of delegation, or two examples of it, and that, why do we need a third? What is the third that's going what is the third going to teach us? And if the first two, in a certain sense, was you have someone else kind of coming in, maybe as a consultant saying, here's what you need to do, Moses does that. Seemingly it doesn't fully work, and now we have God coming in and saying, we need you to give your spirit upon the people. Get these elders to take control. Even though that spirit may move further into the camp, and then you can kind of create a whole culture whereby everyone sort of has that spirit of God. That's what we're looking for. What is the third one trying to teach us? So now we're going to get into the text from our Torah portion in the book of Deuteronomy. And I think there's one important element here that was missing from the other two. And this I'm going to go through the Hebrew, you can follow in the English. Adonai Elohei Avotechem, Yosef Alechem Kachem Elef Pe'amim. The Lord, the God of your fathers, gathered for you all these people 1,000 times. Vivarech etchem ka'asher diber lachem. And that he blessed you just as he's done in the past. How can I alone, this idea of echa levadi, how can I bear you? How can I deal with the fighting that you've caused? Avu lachem anashim chachamim unavonim viduim l'shivtechem va'asimem berashechem. So get from each one of your tribes wise men of understanding, full of knowledge, and I will make them the heads over you. Now, this line seems to evoke the passage from Jethro, or the passage from Parashat Yitro in Exodus, that we're looking for people with a certain kind of, you could say je ne sais quoi, or a certain kind of way of going about them, of who they are, what their qualities are, than necessarily the fact that they're leaders. However, if you go further down, you said that's good, and then what does Moses do? I took for you the leaders of your tribes, people who were wise and were knowledgeable, and that I made them heads over you. And it almost seems from this line that Moses is actually combining the two together. From the first part of Exodus saying, here are the qualities, from the second one in Numbers, that they are the heads of your tribes, and then brings them together, says, I took the heads of your tribes because they are the ones who are wise and understanding. Similar, I think, to Diane, to your point, that these people who are elders, they're supposed to, if they're not, they already have these qualities that you should look up to. And so, not only do you choose these people who already have these qualities, but then I think that the act that what Moses is doing is to say to these leaders, you are leaders, you are wise and understanding. Now I'm going to make you become the true leaders that you are by giving you, in a sense, my spirit, or giving you, in a sense, my laws. There's one other point, though, from this line that I think is very different than the other ones. God does not appear here. Jethro does not appear here. In fact, you can kind of miss it, but if you read the passage carefully, you'll see that the only speaker here is Moses. Meaning that Moses is saying, how can I handle you? In verse, what verse is it? In verse 12. I'll show it to you right here. In verse 12, Moses says, how can I bear you? And then in verse 13 is the beginning of the solution, is get all of these wise men together. I.e., Moses is now the one who is coming up with the solution. It's not coming from without. It's not God coming to save him. It's not Jethro coming to save him. Rather, it's he himself who comes up with the way in which he's going to resolve the burden of the people upon him. But what's more, now we have, beginning from verse 16, we have what Moses says to the leaders that is going to be their charge for how they're supposed to rule. Va'atzaveh et shoftechem, I commanded the judges. ba'eta hi lemor, at this time, shamoa bein achechem ushvatetem tzedek bein ish uvein achiv uvein gero, that you shall judge righteously between every person that you have, between every person, between a man and his brother, and then also among the stranger. Lo takiru fanim bamishpat. You shall not judge, you shall not show respect for either the fact that they're wealthy or the fact that they're poor. In your judgment, kakaton kagadol tishmaun, you shall hear the small and the great alike. Now, by the way, as an aside, the term kakaton and kagadol is used in Exodus to refer to small matters and big matters. The small belong to the judges, the big ones belong to Moses. Now, the same terms, katon and gadol, are referred to in regards to all matters or all people that these judges are dealing with. Perhaps meaning that they are now given the ability to deal with all matters, both small and great alike. So lo taguru mipnei ish ki hamishpat lelohim hu, and that you shall not be afraid of any person. And here's, I think, the very key line: ki hamishpat lelohim hu, v'hadavar asher yikshem mikem takrivun elai ushmativ. That line of ki hamishpat lelohim hu, I think, really brings together the two different elements of the two passages. Meaning, in the passage in Exodus, it's saying, you shall people who fear God. In the second passage, it's saying, God's Spirit's going to lie upon them. And in the first passage, you can have fear of God, but the judgments come from them. Yushputu hem, that they're the ones who are making the judgments. And in the second passage, it's almost as if to say that God is going to make the judgments because the Spirit is upon them, and they're prophesying in the camp, and they're speaking God's words. They're not necessarily speaking their own words. And here in our passage, I think it comes together by the fact that the charge to the people, the charge from Moses to the judges, is to say this: you're going to make the judgments, but don't be afraid of any man. Don't be afraid of potential blowback against yourself, because you should believe in your heart. You should believe that the Spirit of God is upon you, and that the judgments you make fulfill those wishes. You're going to be God's voice here. Or in other words, that the culture of the place, the culture of the people is so embedded within the people that they know that when they speak, when they make a judgment, that they're speaking out of the culture, that they're speaking the voice of the culture from which that they are a part. And whether it's God, whether it's the principles that God represents, that is so embedded within these leaders that they know how to speak them, even though they may be speaking personally, that the judgments that they're making are so coming out of their sense of connection with God. Any thoughts along those lines?
Well, I'm thinking about the waters of Sota, when a man suspects that his wife is faithful, and he brings her to the and God makes that judgment, and I'm just relating that particular example to this instance where it's not the priest but the judges among the people, I guess, that he's appointed, that he's made this connection so that they can be assured that they're going to make the right judgment, and that the guilty will be found guilty and the innocent proved innocent.
Right, and
to me.
And I think that need, which it not only exists in the case of the Sota, especially because it was such a harsh punishment, if you were found to be an adulterer, but that in any case, if someone's coming to me and saying, Rabbi, I need help with this decision, what is the right decision? Or if your employee comes to you and says, I need to know what the right decision is to make here. or your child comes to you and be like, I don't really know what to do here. Can you help me be able to make the right decision? How do you know? How can you truly answer, I know this is the right choice? Now, I think that there are many people who have a sense that, I'm always right, or that we joke around and say, I know I'm always right. Everyone else is wrong. I know I'm always right. But if we really want to take the idea of making right decisions or making good choices seriously, that I think we have to have the humility to understand that as human beings, we're fallible. We also can't, and even if we think that we know what's right, we don't necessarily have the mind space to be able to handle it all. So we need a certain kind of guidance to make sure that any decisions that we make are right. And I wonder if perhaps the real fear of delegating, what Joshua kind of pointed out to Moses, and maybe Moses' fear before coming to Jethro, is I really think that I have that spirit of God. I really think I know what God wants from me. But how can I know that if I give that authority to someone else that they're going to be able to make that choice too? How do I know that I can easily communicate the right way to behave, the right way to make a decision? How can I truly relay that to someone else? And they can know what the right way is. And personally, I think that issue that we have in terms of being able to communicate effectively, this is the right behavior and this is why, and that from a religious perspective, that I believe this is what God wants from us, and to truly not only believe that for ourselves, but to be able to effectively communicate to others so that they believe it themselves, I think that that's part of the real challenge in any kind of moment of delegation. But that the value of it is something that we mentioned, that the entire camp becomes filled with the Spirit of God, that your whole culture of your workplace or of your home becomes that imbued with a sense of collective, of a collective goal, that you really know where you're going and then you can all buy in to what it is that you're trying to do.
Well, if I can contribute, I think that when I've had interaction with Hashem, it's usually through, after prayer, someone else will quote certain scriptures to almost answer what my question was. And almost always, if you want to guide someone in the right direction, you point them back to God's words, because that's what the Torah is. It's supposed to be our directions for life, our instructions.
Right.
It's not law so much as it's instructions. And, that's the thing is that Hashem does love us enough to care about the smallest details. And if we pray, He does answer us. Sometimes you have to be patient and wait a while, but almost always through, I'll wake up and I will just have this one particular verse just imprinted on my mind, or someone else will speak out, and it's not even just one person. I will have 2 or 3 people will mention in course of conversations with other people or with interactions with other people online. The same verse will keep coming up. So I know it's got to be from God. It's almost like He does.
That there has to be some way for each of us to feel that we know that what we're feeling or that we're praying for, that our connection is real, or that the beliefs that we have are true, and some kind of confirmation is necessary. And how we seek that confirmation kind of depends upon our own culture and how we relate to, whether it's issues relating to God or to a sense of creating a positive culture in our home or in our workplace. But that finding some proof, be like, yeah, this is why it's right, and not only just for me, but for you to see it as well. And that you create a place whereby that culture is imbued by the fact that you're able to see its benefits in every place that you look. Avi, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, it just from the various iterations of this concept, it's like almost like the third time's the charm, right? So
Hmm.
there's one approach, a second approach, and finally the approach that works, right?
And just to finalize off of that, that you have in that final approach, it's not Jethro speaking to Moses. It's not God speaking to Moses of what to do. It's finally Moses knowing himself what to do. And that the process of delegation is also a process whereby you're not simply given authority by someone else who you always have to come back to or rely upon them, but that whole process means that you begin to feel comfortable in your own skin and you be able to know what is right and you're able to find the confirmation necessary. And that, you may try once, you may try twice, but as Avi says, when you get to the third time, hopefully it finally works. With that, I want to thank you, both of you, for joining us for this really enlightening class. And I know we went off longer than I expected, but more Torah, more time for us to really engage in some of these important questions. And for that, I'll see you again next week for next week's online Parsha class. Take care. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.